Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Mine was one of them until Rowan Hale walked into my life and turned everything upside down. I'm Elias Voss, and for the past 5 years I've lived in the half-light of my own making, hiding behind a reputation as Seattle's most reclusive glass sculptor. But Rowan, she saw through the frost on the first breath, and once she discovered what I was hiding, she didn't flinch. She did something far worse. She stayed. This is the story of how my perfectly tempered world cracked along every seam, and how the woman who read the fracture lines became the only person who could keep the pieces from scattering. The opening at the Foster White Gallery was a crush of cashmere and curated laughter. Champagne flutes chimed like wind chimes in a storm I had no intention of weathering. I stood beneath a skylight that poured winter light over my newest installation, translucent panes suspended on nearly invisible wire, each sheet etched with silhouettes of hands reaching but never touching. The program called me the Alchemist of Absence. If only they knew the absence was mine. Your work makes silence visible. The voice arrived low, amused, and unmistakably female. I turned. She was maybe 5'10" in battered boots, black hair twisted into a knot held together by what looked like a paintbrush. A camera strap cut across a faded army jacket. Beneath it, a t-shirt read, "Expose Everything." Her eyes were the color of wet cedar after rain, gray-brown, shifting, and they were fixed on me, not the art. "Thank you," I said, the words arriving on autopilot. "I'm Elias Voss, I know. Rowan Hale, I shoot for The Stranger and sometimes for myself when the day job doesn't pay enough to keep me in film." She extended a hand calloused from darkroom chemicals. "Your hands are lonely," she said, nodding toward the installation. "Every one of them. But the negative space between the fingers, that's the ache." That's the story, my pulse stuttered. No one had ever spoken about negative space as if it had a heartbeat. Interpretation is personal, I managed, and avoidance is a reflex, she countered, smiling without mockery. I do it too. Occupational hazard. She drifted to the largest panel, a single sheet of glass so thin it flexed in the air currents, etched with a man's profile on one side and his shadow on the other. The shadow had wings. "This guy," Rowan said, tapping the glass so gently it barely trembled. "He's afraid to fly, but he's more afraid of being seen trying. Am I warm? Too warm?" I felt the old panic rise, the one that made me want to pack every piece in bubble wrap and vanish into the warehouse district. "Art is subjective," I said, "and you're free to pretend that doesn't hit bone." She pulled a battered card from her pocket, thick cotton stock, her name in lowercase, an email, a phone number, an Instagram handle scrawled in Sharpie. "In case you ever want someone to look at the parts you don't hang on walls," I took it. Our fingers brushed. Static sparked. When she walked away, the room felt colder, as if she'd carried the heat with her. That night in my loft above the docks, I uncovered the crates I never opened for anyone. Inside, shards and failures, experiments in color and collapse. A bowl shattered and refused so many times the cracks glowed like lightning. A mobile of glass feathers that chimed when I breathed too hard. And the series I called The Unsaid. Tiny vials stoppered with memories I couldn't speak. The scent of my father's pipe smoke. The sound of my mother locking her bedroom door. The weight of the word faggot hurled across a high school hallway and never quite leaving my skin. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Jonah. "Dad's asking if you're bringing anyone to Hanukkah. I told him you're married to your blowtorch." He didn't laugh. I hadn't come out to them. Hadn't come out to anyone except my studio assistant, Mara, who'd known since the day she caught me sketching a man's collarbone in molten glass and pretending it was abstract. I was 32, successful, untouchable, and drowning in a loneliness so complete it had its own viscosity. I opened Instagram. Rowan's feed was a riot of truth. Migrant workers harvesting tulips at dawn, drag queens applying lashes in cracked mirrors, a non-binary teen shaving their head in a gas station bathroom while their mother waited outside crying into a paper towel. Rowan captured the moment before everything changed. I set the phone down and fired up the glory hole. At 2100 degrees, glass forgets what it was. I wanted to forget, too. 4 days later, Mara barged in with coffee and suspicion. "You've melted 3 punny rods in 2 hours," she said. "That's either genius or a cry for help. Which is it?" I was shaping a vessel so thin it would hold nothing but light. Neither. I lied. She glanced at the bench where Rowan's card lay like evidence. "You kept it. Progress. It's just a card." "Uh-huh. And I'm just a sidekick." She nudged the card with a gloved finger. "Call her, Elias, before you turn into one of your own installations. Beautiful, untouchable, and cold." That afternoon, Rowan called from a payphone because her cell was dead in the middle of a ferry crossing. "I know you don't do studio visits," she said, "but I'm doing a series on makers and their lairs. No publication pressure, full veto power. I just want to see where the magic brews is." Mara, listening on speaker, mouthed, "Say yes," with the urgency of a paramedic. "Tomorrow," I heard myself say. 3 o'clock. "Bring earplugs, the kiln's loud." She laughed, a sound like ice cracking over deep water. "See you in the fire, Voss." I spent the night rehearsing disaster. What if she saw the vials? What if she asked about the wings? What if she looked at me the way my father looked at anything fragile, like it was already broken? At 2:57, the freight elevator rattled. Rowan stepped out carrying a canvas camera bag and a paper sack that smelled of cardamom. "Peace offering," she said, handing over a still warm Queen Aman. I figured artists run on sugar and spite. I took the pastry. Our fingers brushed again. No static this time, just warmth. She moved through the space like she belonged, pausing at the annealing oven, tracing the burn scars on the marver, crouching to study the punty graveyard beneath the bench. When she reached the crates, my stomach dropped. "Mind if I look?" she asked. I should have said no. Instead, I nodded, throat dry. She lifted lids with the reverence of an archaeologist. The lightning bowl. The feather mobile. The vials. She held one to the light. Inside, a curl of blue smoke trapped forever. "This is your diary," she said softly. "They're failures," I corrected. "They're evidence." She set the vial down and faced me. "You think hiding the cracks makes you safer. It just makes the eventual break catastrophic." I laughed, a sound like glass hitting concrete. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" She rolled up her sleeve. A jagged scar ran from wrist to elbow. Bike messenger, bad intersection, worse driver. I spent a year pretending it didn't hurt because pain meant weakness. Then I started photographing my scar. Every month. Same light, same angle. The story changed even though the mark didn't. She met my eyes. "Your scars aren't the problem, Elias." The silence is. Something in me fractured. Not the clean line of a score wheel, but the messy split of overheated glass. I found myself talking. About the hallway. About the way my mother's God didn't seem to have room for sons who loved differently. About the lover I'd ghosted because he left a coffee mug in my cupboard, and suddenly the walls were too close. Rowan listened without flinching, camera forgotten at her side. When I finished, the kiln's low rumble was the only sound. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me with the heat." She raised her camera then, not asking permission because she already had it. The shutter clicked like a heartbeat. Weeks blurred. Rowan came back, officially for the series, unofficially because neither of us could stay away. She photographed me piping gathers of molten glass, sweat-carving channels through kiln soot. I taught her to pull cane. She taught me to develop film in a bathroom rigged with red bulbs and prayers. We argued about composition and negative space, and whether loneliness had a color. She voted indigo. I insisted clear. One night the power went out during a storm. The kiln cooled. The city went dark. We sat on the floor sharing a bottle of mezcal, emergency candles flickering inside failed bowls. "Truth or truth?" she asked. "Truth. What are you still afraid to say out loud?" I swallowed smoke and confession that I want this, us, to be real. And that I'm waiting for the moment you realize I'm more shard than whole. She was quiet so long I thought I'd miscalculated everything. Then she leaned over and kissed me, tasting of salt and agave. Her hands framed my face like she was checking for cracks. "I'm not going anywhere," she said against my mouth. "But you have to stop treating yourself like a piece that doesn't fit the puzzle. You're the damn picture." The next morning, I blew a vessel large enough for 2 people to stand inside. Thin as a soap bubble, strong as grief. Rowan etched the interior with a diamond wheel. A tiny doorway, barely visible unless you knew where to look. For Hanukkah, I brought her home. My mother took one look at the woman holding my hand. Boots, camera, unapologetic, and started crying into the latkes. My father shook Rowan's hand like he was afraid she'd break, then didn't let go for a full minute. Later, under the menorah's unreliable glow, Rowan lifted her camera. "One for the series," she whispered. "Family, redefined." Click. Months later, the gallery show opened to a line around the block. My new installation, the great vessel illuminated from within, Rowan's doorway catching the light like a promise. Beside it, her photographs, me at the glory hole, my parents laughing at the dinner table, the 2 of us asleep on the studio couch, tangled in drop cloths. Beside it, her photographs, me at the glory hole, my parents laughing at the dinner table, the 2 of us asleep on the studio couch tangled in drop cloths and extension cords. The program read, Elias Voss and Rowan Hale, Transparency. After the E. Speeches, Rowan found me in the back room where extra crates waited like secrets finally unpacked. "Still think some things should stay buried?" she asked. I pulled her close, felt the steady beat of her heart against the thin wall of my ribs. Only if we dig them up together. She smiled, the same fearless curve she'd worn the night we met. "Deal. But next time we use a bigger shovel." Outside, Seattle rain softened the city lights into watercolor. Inside, the vessel glowed, doorway open, waiting for whatever truth we'd pour into it next. The weight of light Julian had always been careful. His photographs were precise, deliberate, each frame a calculated balance of shadow and light, as if he could control the chaos of the world by freezing it in time. But when he met Caleb, something in him began to unravel. It started at the opening of Caleb's exhibition in a cramped Seattle gallery, the air thick with the scent of turpentine and wine. Julian, a freelance photographer covering the event for a local arts magazine, was drawn to Caleb's work immediately. Not the polished cityscapes or vibrant abstracts that dominated the walls, but the smaller, raw sketches tucked away in a corner. Charcoal figures caught in moments of quiet defiance, their faces half hidden, as if guarding a secret. Caleb was different from the other artists Julian had met. Where they preened and networked, Caleb stood quietly by his work, his dark hair falling into his eyes, his hands stained with ink. When Julian approached, notebook in hand, Caleb's gaze was steady but guarded. "You're the photographer," Caleb said, "not a question. I saw you earlier circling my sketches like you were trying to solve a puzzle." Julian smiled, caught off guard. "They're different. The rest of your work is bold, public. These feel private." Caleb's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "They are. But you're here, aren't you? Asking questions." There was a challenge in his tone, but it was gentle, disarming. Julian asked to see more of the sketches, and to his surprise, Caleb agreed. The next day, Julian found himself in Caleb's loft studio, a converted warehouse space overlooking Puget Sound. The room was a controlled chaos. Canvases leaning against walls, jars of brushes, a single skylight pouring pale light onto a scarred wooden table. Caleb handed Julian a worn sketchbook. "These don't leave this room," he said, his voice low. "They're not for the gallery. They're me." Julian opened the book with care. The sketches were raw, visceral, figures tangled in thorned vines, faces fractured by jagged lines, eyes that seemed to stare back with a mix of longing and fear. They were beautiful and unsettling, a window into a soul Caleb kept hidden from the world. Thank you, Julian said, his voice quieter than he intended. For trusting me with these. Caleb shrugged, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or hope. You see things, he said. Most people don't. Julian pulled out his camera, an instinct honed over years of capturing fleeting moments. Mind if I shoot you working? Just be you. Ignore me. Caleb raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. Easier said than done. Julian watched through the lens as Caleb picked up a pencil, his movements fluid yet deliberate. The click of the shutter felt intrusive at first, but Caleb settled into his work, sketching a figure perched on a crumbling wall, arms outstretched, caught between collapse and escape. What's this one about? Julian asked, adjusting his angle. Caleb didn't look up. Choice. The moment you decide whether to stay broken or rebuild yourself. Click. Click. Have you ever been there? Julian asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. That moment? Caleb's pencil stilled. He met Julian's gaze through the camera, and for a moment the air felt heavy with unspoken truths. Every time I pick up a pencil, he said. Every time I decide whether to show the world who I am or keep hiding. Julian lowered his camera, his heart pounding. And what keeps you from choosing? Caleb set down his pencil and leaned back, his expression unreadable. Fear. The kind that tells you it's safer to stay small than to risk being seen. Julian felt the weight of the words, a mirror to his own carefully constructed life. He was out, had been for years, but he'd learned to navigate the world with a kind of polished detachment, charming, professional, untouchable. He dated, but never deeply. He photographed strangers' truths but kept his own locked away. What would it take for you to choose? Julian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb stood, crossing the room until he was close enough that Julian could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. I'm still figuring that out, he said. Then, with a small, defiant smile, but you make it feel possible. The words hung between them, electric and dangerous. Julian's pulse raced, but before he could respond, Caleb stepped back, breaking the spell. There's a cafe down the street, he said. Good coffee. Want to go? Julian nodded, surprised by his own certainty. Yeah, I'd like that. The cafe was warm and dimly lit, its walls lined with mismatched bookshelves. They sat in a corner booth, steam rising from their mugs. Caleb was quieter here, his intensity softened by the casual setting, but his questions were sharp, probing. Tell me something real about Julian Reyes, he said, leaning forward. Not the photographer bio. Julian laughed, buying time with a sip of coffee. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with why you do this. Why photography? Julian traced the rim of his mug. When I was 12, my dad gave me his old Nikon. He was a photojournalist, always chasing stories in places I couldn't pronounce. I'd watch him develop film in our basement, the way images appeared like magic. It felt like power. Like I could hold a moment forever, make sense of it. Caleb nodded, listening intently. And what moments do you hold on to? The ones people don't show, Julian said. The ones they're afraid to, like your sketches. Caleb's smile was small but genuine. You don't miss much, do you? They talked for hours, the conversation weaving between light and heavy. Caleb shared fragments of his past, growing, up in a small Oregon town, the weight of his parents' expectations, the way art became his refuge. Julian found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, admitting how he'd built a life of surfaces to avoid the messiness of connection. I came out at 19, Julian said, his voice steady but low. My dad was gone by then, but my mom, she didn't get it, still doesn't. She loves me, but it's like she's waiting for me to figure things out, I stopped trying to explain. Caleb's expression softened. You're not out to everyone, are you? Julian's laugh was bitter. I'm out enough to live my life, but not enough to stop hiding parts of it. Work, family, friends, everyone gets a version of me. The real one's complicated. Complicated is just another word for human, Caleb said. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing Julian's. You don't have to hide with me. Julian's breath caught. The touch was simple, but it felt like a lifeline. You don't even know me, he said, echoing a fear he hadn't voiced in years. I know enough, Caleb said, and I want to know more, if you'll let me. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Texts at odd hours, Julian sending photos of rain-slicked streets or a stranger's fleeting smile, Caleb sharing sketches of half-formed ideas. Julian's best friend, Marcus, teased him about the glow he hadn't seen since college. Julian didn't deny it, but the past has a way of catching up. On Thursday night, Julian's phone rang. His mother's name flashed on the screen, and he hesitated before answering. Julian, mijo, you've been so quiet, she said, her voice warm but laced with concern. Thanksgiving's coming up. You should come home. Bring someone special, maybe? A nice girl? The familiar ache settled in Julian's chest. I'm not seeing anyone, Mom. There's still time, she said, her tone bright but forced. You're 30 now. We just want you to be happy. After they hung up, Julian stared at Caleb's latest text, a sketch of a bird breaking free from a cage, captioned, For you. He typed a reply. Can we meet tomorrow? Need to talk. Caleb's response was immediate. Always. Name the place. Saturday morning, Julian drove them to Discovery Park, a sprawling stretch of forest and cliffs overlooking the Sound. He led Caleb to a hidden trail, one he'd found after his last breakup, a relationship he'd ended because he couldn't bear the vulnerability of being fully seen. This place, Julian said as they reached a clearing with a view of the water, it's where I come when I need to breathe. Caleb sat beside him on a driftwood log, their knees brushing. You said you needed to talk. Julian took a deep breath, the salt air sharp in his lungs. My mom called. She wants me to bring someone to Thanksgiving, a girlfriend. And I realized I'm tired of living half a life. I've been choosing their version of me for so long that I forgot I had a choice. Caleb's gaze was steady, encouraging. And now? Now there's you, Julian said, his voice raw. You see me, Caleb. The parts I've spent years hiding. And it's terrifying, but it's also everything. I don't want to keep choosing fear. Caleb reached out, his hand resting on Julian's. You don't have to. You're already choosing just by being here, by telling me this. Julian's eyes stung, but he didn't look away. What if I mess it up? What if I tell them and it all falls apart? Then it falls apart, Caleb said simply. But you'll still be you, and you'll be free. Julian laughed, a shaky sound. You make it sound so easy. It's not, Caleb admitted. But it's worth it. You're worth it. The words cracked something open in Julian's chest. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against Caleb's. Stay with me, he whispered. Help me figure this out. Caleb's answer was a soft kiss, tentative at first, then deeper, a promise in the salt-scented air. When they pulled apart, Caleb smiled, his eyes bright with something that looked like hope. Always, he said. As they walked back to the car, hands entwined, Julian felt the weight of the cliff he'd been standing on for years. For the first time, he wasn't afraid to jump. This version shifts the setting to Seattle, changes the characters' professions, photographer and sketch artist, and introduces new backstories This version shifts the setting to Seattle, changes the characters' professions, photographer and sketch artist, and introduces new backstories and conflicts while maintaining the emotional intimacy, themes of self-discovery, and the slow-burn romance of the original. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks or expansions. I'd always lived in the shadows of my own making. My name is Julian Harper, and for years my life in Seattle had been a carefully curated performance. By day, I was a graphic designer at a sleek tech startup in South Lake Union, crafting sleek logos and sleek lies. By night, I poured my truth into digital illustrations, vibrant, raw, and anonymous, posted to an online portfolio under the pseudonym J.H. Shade. My art was my confession, my rebellion, the only place I dared to be fully myself. But in the real world, I was still hiding. It was late September, the kind of drizzly Seattle evening that made the city glow with wet neon, when I met Caleb Nguyen. I was at a pop-up art gallery in Capitol Hill, a cramped space packed with local creatives sipping cheap wine and pretending to understand abstract sculpture. I'd come to see a friend's installation, but my eyes kept drifting to a photograph on the wall. A striking black and white image of a protester mid-shout, fist raised, rain streaking down their face. The raw emotion in it hit me like a punch to the chest. "That's one of mine," a voice said beside me, warm and low, with a hint of a smile. I turned to find a man with dark curly hair tied back in a loose bun, warm brown eyes, and a camera slung around his neck. He wore a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal inked forearms, and he was looking at me like he already knew something I hadn't said. "Julian," I said, offering my hand, my voice steadier than I felt. "Caleb," he replied, his grip firm but gentle. "You an artist?" "Designer," I corrected quickly, the lie automatic. "I dabble." He raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but didn't push. Instead, he nodded at the photograph. "This one's from a climate rally last spring. That moment, pure defiance, pure hope. You ever feel that in your work?" I swallowed, my throat tight. Sometimes. We talked for hours that night, weaving through the crowd, then spilling out onto the street where the rain had softened to a mist. Caleb was a photojournalist, freelancing for outlets that covered everything from indigenous land rights to queer liberation marches. His passion was infectious, his stories vivid, climbing rooftops in Manila to capture urban poverty, dodging tear gas in Portland to document Black Lives Matter protests. He was fearless, unapologetically himself, and it made me feel small in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. By the time we parted ways, he'd slipped his number into my phone with a grin. "Text me if you ever want to see the city through my lens." I didn't text him for 3 days. I told myself it was because I was busy, but really I was terrified. Caleb was light where I was shadow, and I wasn't sure I could survive the exposure, but I did text him. And then we met for coffee at a cozy shop in Fremont, where he teased me about my overly complicated latte order. We met again for drinks at a dive bar in Ballard, where he kissed my cheek goodnight, and I felt my world tilt. A week later, we were inseparable, spending evenings in his tiny Belltown apartment, cooking stir-fry, listening to indie playlists, and talking about everything except the one thing I couldn't say. I was gay. I'd known it since I was 15, sketching boys in my notebooks while my classmates chased girls. But I'd buried it deep, under layers of denial and fear. My parents, devout Catholics who'd moved from Manila to Seattle before I was born, had raised me to be their perfect son. Straight, successful, married to a nice Filipino girl. I'd tried to be that son, dating women in college, forcing myself into a mold that cracked me open inside. My art was the only place I let the truth breathe, but even there I hid behind a pseudonym. Caleb, though, he was out and proud, his life an open book. His Instagram was full of him at pride parades, kissing boyfriends in candid shots, living without shame. It was beautiful and it terrified me, because the more I fell for him, the more I knew I couldn't keep hiding. Not from him. Not forever. It came to a head one night in his apartment, the city skyline glittering through his window. We were sprawled on his couch, my head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. The air felt heavy with something unsaid. "Julian," he said, his voice soft but deliberate. "I'm not going to push you to be anything you're not ready for. That's your call, your path. But I need you to know where I stand." He shifted to face me, his eyes steady. "I'm falling for you. Hard. More than I expected after 2 weeks. And I want to see where this goes. But I can't be a secret. I fought too hard to live openly, to be proud of who I am. I won't go back to hiding, not even for someone as incredible as you." His words were a blade, sharp and clean, cutting through my defenses. He wasn't demanding I come out tomorrow. He was just being honest, laying his boundary bare. And in that moment, I realized that's what I'd been craving. Someone who could hold space for my fear while refusing to shrink themselves for me. "I don't want you to be my secret," I said, my voice shaking. "I want to be brave enough to live the life where I get to be with you, out in the open. Where I stop hiding behind my screen and start being real." Caleb's smile was like dawn breaking. "That's a big step." "I know." My hands were trembling, my heart racing with adrenaline. "I'm scared out of my mind, but I'm more scared of losing you before I even try." He cupped my face, his thumbs brushing my cheeks, and kissed me. Not the fleeting peck from nights ago, but a real kiss, deep, warm, full of possibility. His lips were soft, his touch sure, and I melted into him, into the promise of us. When we pulled apart, breathless, I whispered, "Was that okay?" "It was everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're everything." We stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the city humming below us. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. We stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the city humming below us. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in my tiny Ravenna apartment, a blank Google Doc open on my laptop. I was going to tell my parents. I'd put it off for too long, and Caleb's honesty had lit a fire under me. My fingers hovered over the keys, then typed, "Dear Mama and Papa, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been too afraid to say for years. I've been scared of letting you down, of not being the son you dreamed I'd be. But I can't keep hiding who I am. I'm gay." I stared at the words, simple and seismic. My chest ached as I kept writing, pouring out my truth. How I'd always known. How I'd tried to be someone else. How I'd met Caleb, a man who made me want to be brave. I told them I loved them, that I hoped they could love me too, even if this wasn't what they expected. I read it 4 times, tears blurring the screen, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. I texted Caleb immediately. I sent the email. His reply was instant. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm gonna puke." Also, like I can breathe for the first time in years, that's the one. "Want company?" God, yes. Half an hour later, he was at my door with pho from our favorite Vietnamese spot and a fierce determination to distract me. We're eating noodles, watching the Great British Bake Off, and not thinking about that email until tomorrow. "Cool?" "Cool," I said, grateful for his solidity. We curled up on my lumpy futon, his warmth anchoring me. He didn't try to fix my anxiety or promise it would all be fine. He just stayed, his presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. "Thank you," I murmured into the dim light of my apartment. "For what?" "For not letting me face this by myself. For seeing me." Caleb kissed my forehead. "Julian, I'm in this. You're stuck with me." And for once, being stuck felt like freedom. I sent the email on a Tuesday morning, my hands shaking as I clicked the button. Caleb met me outside the coffee shop where I'd hit send, his hand steady in mine as we walked through the drizzle. "No matter how they respond," he said, "you did the hard part. You were honest." "I don't feel honest," I admitted. "I feel like I'm unraveling." That's what honesty does sometimes. It's messy, but it's real. The call came 4 days later. I was in my apartment tweaking a logo for a client when my phone buzzed. Mama flashed on the screen and my stomach dropped. "Julian," she said when I answered, her voice tight, careful. "We got your email." I gripped the edge of my desk, my legs unsteady. Okay, your papa and I, we need time. This is not what we thought for you. It's a lot. A long pause, heavy with everything she wasn't saying. But you are our son. We love you. If this makes you happy, we will try to understand. It wasn't the warm embrace I'd dreamed of, but it was a start. I am happy, Mama. Happier than I've been in years. Caleb, he's good to me. Then we want to meet him. Maybe at Christmas. You come home, bring him. I laughed, a shaky sound. Really? Really. It will be strange. Your Tita Linda will talk too much. Your papa will ask too many questions. But we are family, Julian. We learn. After we hung up, I called Caleb, my voice trembling with relief. They want to meet you. Christmas, the whole family. That's huge, he said, and I could hear his grin. You okay? Terrified, elated, like I'm free-falling. You're soaring, Julian. I'll be right there with you. Fair warning, though. I get nervous around parents and might ramble about lens apertures. I laughed, the sound lighter than I'd felt in years. My family can handle it. The weeks before Christmas were a whirlwind. Caleb and I were together constantly, our lives intertwining like vines. He met my best friend, Mara, who sized him up over tacos and declared, he's a keeper. Don't mess this up. I met his crew, a lively mix of photographers, activists, and baristas who welcomed me with open arms. We went to a drag brunch in Capitol Hill, and I held his hand under the table, my heart pounding but my grip steady. My art changed, too. The anonymous illustrations I'd hidden behind gave way to bold, personal pieces. I designed a series called Unveiled, digital portraits of moments with Caleb, him laughing over a failed attempt at making lumpia, the way his eyes crinkled when he teased me, the two of us silhouetted against the Puget Sound at sunset. I posted them under my real name for the first time, my stomach in knots but my heart full. Mara saw the series and gasped. This is you, Julian. Raw, real, alive. This is what you were meant to create. She was right. I'd been designing for other people's brands for years. Now I was designing my life. She was right. I'd been designing for other people's brands for years. Now I was designing my life. Christmas Eve arrived, gray and cold. I picked Caleb up from his apartment, where he'd packed a tin of homemade bibinka and a bottle of red wine. You bake? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Family recipe, he said with a wink. My Lola's secret weapon for charming aunties. My parents lived in Renton, in the same modest house where I'd grown up. The driveway was lined with Christmas lights, the air thick with the scent of pine and adobo. As we pulled in, I saw the basketball hoop I'd spent hours under as a kid, the porch where I'd sketched in secret, the window to my old room where I'd first admitted I was different. You good? Caleb asked, squeezing my hand. Yeah, I said, surprised to mean it. I think I am. My mother opened the door, her face softer than I'd remembered, her eyes flicking from me to Caleb to our joined hands. She took a deep breath. Julian, you must be Caleb. He shook her hand, all warmth and charm. Mrs. Harper, thanks for having me. I brought dessert, she smiled, tentative but genuine. Come in. Your papa's in the kitchen, pretending he's not nervous. The house was alive with family. My sister Lena, her husband, their toddler running circles around the Christmas tree. My younger brother Nico offered Caleb a San Miguel and immediately started grilling him about his camera gear. My father, quiet and stoic, stood when we entered the living room. Caleb, he said, shaking his hand. Julian says you're a photographer. Telling important stories. Yes, sir. Social justice, mostly. Climate, queer rights, systemic inequality. My father nodded, processing. Good work. The world needs truth tellers. Julian does that too with his designs. I blinked, stunned. My father rarely talked about my work. Something passed between us, recognition maybe, or pride. Dinner was chaotic, as promised. Tita Linda asked if Caleb was really Julian's friend, earning a sharp look from Lena. Nico steered the conversation to basketball. My mother passed platters of pancit and lumpia with fierce determination. Caleb was perfect, answering questions with honesty, making my family laugh with stories from his travels. complimenting my mother's cooking. Under the table, his hand found my knee, a quiet anchor. I was here with my boyfriend, my family, my truth. And the world hadn't ended. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. We stepped onto the back porch, the cold biting through our sweaters. "Your mama and I talked a lot after your email," he said, hands in his pockets. "We wondered if we made you feel you couldn't tell us. I'm sorry, Julian. We love you. Exactly as you are." My eyes stung. I was afraid I'd let you down. "The only way you could let me down is by hiding who you are. Caleb, he's a good man. He looks at you like you're his whole world. That's what I want for you." I nodded, unable to speak. He hugged me, awkward but real, and I felt a weight lift I hadn't known I was carrying. Spring bloomed in Seattle with cherry blossoms and soft rain. I stood in a gallery in Pioneer Square, my unveiled series on display for the first time. The centerpiece was a digital painting of Caleb and me at Gasworks Park, hands clasped, the city skyline behind us, our silhouettes glowing against a twilight sky. The collection told my story. Fear, hiding, the leap into truth, the joy of living openly. "You can feel the heart in every pixel," a gallery goer said. "It's fearless." "It was the hardest thing I've ever made," I said. "And the truest." Caleb was there, photographing the event for a feature on emerging queer artists. His eyes met mine across the room, and the love in them still stole my breath. My family came. My mother lingered teary-eyed in front of a piece I'd made of my childhood room. My father bought 2 prints for his office. Lena brought her co-workers. Nico dragged his gamer friends. Mara appeared with Prosecco. "Look at you living your truth. How's it feel?" "Like I'm finally real," I said. She clinked her glass against mine. "Proud of you, Jules." That night, Caleb and I walked along the waterfront, the sound lapping gently, the city lights shimmering. He pulled a small box from his pocket. "Not a ring," he said with a grin. "Open it." Inside was a sleek tablet stylus and a note. "For all the stories you'll tell. Love, C." He flipped open a sketchbook he'd been carrying. The first page was a photo he'd taken of me in my apartment weeks ago, hunched over my tablet, eyes haunted. The second was from last week, me laughing, paint splattered, free. "This is what I saw," he said. "You becoming. Did I become?" I asked, voice thick. We both did. Together. I kissed him, the water and city our witnesses. "I love you, Caleb Nguyen. Your heart, your lens, your everything. I love you, Julian Harper. Your courage, your art, your beautiful soul." A year later, we stood in Discovery Park, where we'd had our third date, the Puget Sound stretching before us. The wedding was small, family, friends, Mara officiating with only one tearful stumble. My parents sat in the front row, my mother in a coral dress, my father's hand on hers. Lena was my best woman. Caleb's brother flew in from Vancouver. Caleb's vows were poetry. "Julian, you showed me that truth is the ultimate art. You let me see you, and in doing so, you set us both free. I promise to hold your hand through every leap, to love you in all your brilliance and mess." Mine were simpler, spoken from the heart. "Caleb, you saw what I was hiding and didn't flinch. You taught me that being seen is the bravest thing I'll ever do. I promise to live openly with you, to create with you, to jump with you always." We kissed as husbands to cheers and tears. My father hugged me later, eyes wet. "You're happy, son. That's all I ever wanted. I'm sorry I made you wait so long." "You're here now," I said. "That's enough." We moved into a loft in Georgetown, a shared space for my design studio and his darkroom. My art covered one wall, his photos another. It was messy, vibrant hours. "Happy?" Caleb asked one night, pulling me close. "More than I ever thought possible. A year ago, I was a shadow, afraid of my own light. Now I was married to the man who helped me shine." "You were always the light," he said. "I just gave you a reason to turn it on. Some truths are meant to stay hidden. Others are meant to be found by the right person at the right time. Caleb found mine, and in doing so, he set me free. And that freedom was the greatest design I ever created. This version swaps Adrian and Ethan for Julian and Caleb. shifts the setting from Portland to Seattle, and changes the art forms, painting to digital design. Photography remains, but with a photojournalism focus. The emotional arc, family dynamics, and themes of courage and love remain intact, with fresh details to keep the story distinct yet familiar.